Snow fell in slow, breath-like spirals the night the world grew quiet around Harper Collins's cabin, as if winter itself were holding its breath to see whether the small flame inside would endure. The winds had spent the day clawing at the wooden boards, rattling them like bones. Yet now the valley lay still beneath a sky washed pale by moonlight. Inside, the fire had dwindled to a trembling ember, more ash than flame, and Harper rested curled beneath thin quilts, her breathing shallow, her lips touched by fever's dry heat. Beside her, little Lena, only 7, all soft eyes and stubborn hope, placed a damp cloth on her mother's brow, whispering tiny promises she learned from no one except the longing of her own heart. The cabin smelled of cold wood and fading strength, the kind of air that sits heavy on a child who knows she must be brave not because anyone told her to be, but because there is no one else left to carry the fear. Harper tried to sit up, but the motion stole the breath from her lungs. She reached for Lena's hand, managing a faint smile that flickered like the last warmth in the hearth. Her voice, usually gentle as summer rain, reduced itself to a thin whisper that barely crossed the distance between them. "You're safe, sweetheart. I'm all right." But her words broke apart, scattered by a cough that bent her forward with quiet agony. Lena steadied her, though her small hands trembled. Outside, the world waited in a silence broken only by the soft collapse of fresh snow. Lena looked toward the frosted window, watching the dim, flickering moonlight blur across the glass. She had never felt winter press this hard against their door before, never sensed danger creeping in through something as simple as a cold night. Her mother's breath faltered again, and Lena pressed her cheek to Harper's shoulder, as if willing her own warmth into her. She remembered stories Harper once told her, whispered in gentler seasons, about a man who lived beyond the ridge. A giant Apache whose presence the town feared but whose eyes, Harper said, carried more kindness than most men dared show. Tahoe Red Bear. A man who moved with the calm of a mountain, and spoke with a voice shaped by silence rather than pride. Harper had told Lena that when she was expecting her, he once left a stack of firewood by their door on a night just as cold as this one, though he never waited to be thanked. Lena rose carefully from her mother's side. The cabin felt larger without Harper's strength filling it, too hollow, too still, as though winter had seeped into every corner. She pulled on her thin shawl, wrapped it twice around her small frame, and looked again at the window. Beyond the frost she saw the faint outline of the ridge, a dark shape against the pale glow of the sky. Somewhere beyond that ridge, she believed, lived the only person her mother ever trusted without fear. Harper stirred again, her voice breaking as she begged Lena to stay inside, but even in her delirium she could not hide the terror in her eyes. The fever was rising. Her breaths grew shorter, sharper, as if winter's hand pressed against her chest. Lena touched her mother's cheek and whispered a promise she could barely form. "I'll be back with help. I will. I have to." And though her legs trembled beneath her, her resolve did not. She pushed open the cabin door, and the world swallowed her in a rush of cold that bit through cloth and bone. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, melting into icy tears. The path to Tahoe's cabin wound through the trees like a pale ribbon, faint and half-buried. The moon hung low above it, offering what little guidance it could. Lena stepped forward. Lifting her chin the way Harper did on days she refused to let sorrow bend her. Each step sank deeper than the last, but she kept moving, whispering words not meant for the sky, yet carried upward all the same. "Mama, hold on. Please hold on." She imagined her mother's hands resting on her shoulders, steadying her through the dark. She imagined Tahoe's calm presence waiting just beyond the next turn, a figure carved from strength and silence, someone who would know what to do when the world felt too heavy. By the time she reached the edge of the ridge, her breath shook, but her spirit did not. A faint glow shimmered ahead, one lone lantern burning in the window of the great man's cabin. It flickered like a heartbeat in the storm, as if waiting for her. She gathered the last of her courage, stepped up to the door scraped by years of wind, and raised her trembling hand. She knocked once. The lantern inside flared, casting a sudden ripple of gold across the snow. She knocked again, this time with all the hope a child could carry. Footsteps moved within, slow, heavy, unmistakably belonging to someone larger than any man she had ever met. The door creaked as it opened, warm light spilling outward in a widening arc that swallowed the cold at her feet. And there, framed in the glow of that single lantern, stood the towering silhouette she had been searching for. His breath rose in clouds around him, and the snow melting on his bare shoulders made him look carved from winter and fire all at once. Lena lifted her face, her lashes heavy with frost, and forced her trembling voice into the air between them. "Mama needs help." Those three fragile words broke the night's stillness before settling into the giant's steady gaze. For a long moment he did not move, as if weighing the depth of a child's fear against the storm outside. Then his expression shifted, gentle and grave, and he stepped forward as though answering a call older than the valley. Tejo Red Bear studied the small girl on his threshold, snow clinging to her lashes like fragile beads of glass, and something deep inside him shifted with a quiet, indescribable ache. He had seen hardship carve itself into faces far older than hers, yet the courage in her trembling voice pierced him more cleanly than any blade ever had. He stepped aside, letting the warm lantern glow spill around her thin shawl as she entered, and the wooden floor groaned under the weight of his decisions. The storm roared behind them, swallowing her footprints as if winter wished to keep her journey secret. Lena stood in the middle of his cabin, breath shaking, eyes wide with a hope too small to carry the burden she bore. Tejo knelt so they were level, his voice low as riverstone as he asked her to tell him everything. Her words tumbled out in uneven breaths, each one carrying the weight of a night she had been far too young to face alone. Mama couldn't breathe right, Mama kept shaking. Mama whispered things that sounded like goodbyes wrapped in apologies. Tejo listened without interrupting, his dark eyes softening with every fractured detail, as though the child's fear reached into the quiet chambers of his own past. He remembered another winter long ago when this same valley held his family's voices, before sickness hollowed their laughter, and left him standing alone beneath an indifferent sky. Lena's pleas stirred that memory like a hand brushing dust off an old wound. He wrapped her in a thick fur cloak, its weight swallowing her small frame, and rose with a resolve that felt older than any bitterness the town had ever thrown his way. Tonight was not a night for hesitation. He lifted his medicine satchel from the wall hook, its leather creased by years of quiet use, and placed inside the herbs he had gathered through the last warm months. Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping loose snow across the ridge in shimmering ribbons. Yet Tejo stepped into it without hesitation, cradling Lena against his chest as if shielding a candle from the storm. She clung to him with trust born from desperation, her small fingers grasping the fabric of his coat. The valley below lay steeped in moon-washed blue, the path barely visible beneath the restless drift. Tejo's strides cut through it with a certainty that came not from strength alone, but from a promise no one had heard him make. He remembered Harper's face before he ever reached the cabin, gentle, determined, a woman who had once offered him water when the town refused. He walked faster, fearing he might be too late. They descended the slope carefully, the snow deepening with each yard, until the faint outline of Harper's cabin appeared like a fragile breath pressed into the landscape. The windows glowed dimly, the fire inside fighting a losing battle against winter's hunger. Tejo pushed the door open with his shoulder, expecting the worst, yet the sight still struck him harder than he prepared for. Harper lay curled near the hearth, her skin pale as frost, her breaths shallow and irregular. Even in illness she carried a certain quiet grace, the kind that made the world soften when she entered it. He knelt beside her, brushing the hair from her forehead with a gentleness that surprised even himself. Lena sank to her mother's side, whispering she had brought help, her voice trembling with relief and fear intertwined. Harper stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open to meet Tejo's steady gaze. Recognition flickered in Harper's weakened expression, a faint spark of memory breaking through the fever's haze. Years ago she had defended him against the town's sharp tongues, refusing to let lies erode the truth of his character. She had stood between him and cruelty, without expecting anything in return, and he had carried gratitude for her like an ember cupped in both hands. Now, seeing her fragile and fading, he felt that ember swell into something brighter. He mixed herbs with warm water, lifting her gently so she could drink. The scent of sage and pine filled the room, weaving through the air like a quiet reassurance. Lena watched every movement, her eyes wide with a trust so complete it humbled him. The storm outside clawed at the cabin walls, but inside a new kind of resolve settled over Tejo, steadying his hands as he worked. When Harper's breathing eased even slightly, Tejo allowed himself a single quiet exhale, though he knew the night still held its dangers. Fever could rise again without warning. The cold could steal strength before dawn. Yet something about the way Harper's fingers brushed his wrist, barely conscious yet impossibly gentle, stirred a vow he did not speak aloud. The town had always regarded him with suspicion, whispering stories born from ignorance rather than truth, but Harper had never looked at him with fear. Even now, in her weakness, her gaze carried the same calm recognition that once softened his hardest days. Lena curled beside her mother, exhaustion pulling her into sleep, and Tejo wrapped a blanket around both of them. The lantern's glow cast warm gold across their faces, turning the small cabin into a sacred shelter where past wounds loosened their hold and new strength quietly rooted itself. For a moment he simply watched them, the mother and child who had walked unknowingly into the deepest chambers of his guarded heart. The storm outside wailed like a restless spirit, but the sound no longer unsettled him. He had felt alone for so long that he had nearly forgotten what it meant to be needed, to be trusted without question. Harper's presence returned that memory with startling clarity, reminding him of the night she had stood between him and the sheriff's anger when others had tried to blame him for a fight he did not start. She had spoken truth without hesitation, restoring dignity the town tried to take from him. Now, seeing her struggle against fever, he felt the weight of that memory settle into purpose. He tended the fire, added more wood, and promised silently that this night would not claim her life the way sickness had once claimed his family. As the hours stretched toward dawn, the fever's edge began to dull, leaving Harper drifting in a fragile peace that hovered between waking and dreams. Tejo remained beside her, his broad frame unmoving, as though he believed that shifting even a breath might disturb the small victories they had claimed through the night. Outside, the wind weakened, trading its howl for a soft whisper that drifted through the valley like a benediction. Lena stirred, lifting her head to look at him with bleary gratitude, before nestling again against her mother's side. Tejo felt something settle inside him, something steady and unyielding, a truth he had not yet dared name. He had spent years living on the outskirts of a world that refused to understand him, but in this small cabin he felt the first warmth of belonging he had known since boyhood. And just as that warmth found him, Harper's fingers moved weakly, curling toward his hand. The first pale threads of dawn crept across the valley like shy fingers feeling their way through the remnants of the storm, and Tejo Red Bear rose from his place beside the hearth with a heaviness that came from caring too deeply, too suddenly, for someone he never expected to hold again. Harper slept fitfully, her breath steadier than the night before, though still marked by the fragile hesitations of a body fighting its way back toward life. Lena curled against her mother, one small hand resting over Harper's heart as if her touch alone could keep it beating. Tejo watched them with the quiet reverence of a man who had long believed such scenes belonged to someone else's world. He stepped outside to gather water, letting the cold bite at his skin, welcoming the shock as a reminder that the night had been real. Frost clung to the cabin roof in glittering patterns that caught the soft rise of dawn, and the valley below, blanketed in untouched snow, glowed with a serenity that contradicted the storm's violence. Yet beneath the beauty lingered a tension, a knowledge that the town would not remain ignorant of Harper's whereabouts for long. The valley was a place where whispers outran horses, and nothing stirred without eyes turning toward it. Tejo returned inside, rekindling the fire until the flames reached toward the kettle. The warmth spread slowly, brushing Harper's chilled cheeks, coaxing color into them. She stirred, her lashes trembling before they lifted. Her gaze drifted toward him, soft but weighted with confusion and gratitude intertwined. For a moment she did not speak. She simply watched the way he moved, steady and deliberate, as though his presence alone could steady the air around her. Lena woke soon after, and the first thing she did was check her mother's breathing, her small shoulders relaxing when she heard its gentle rhythm. "Mama, he helped you." Her voice carried the quiet awe of a child who had witnessed a miracle. Harper reached for Lena's hand, squeezing it weakly before letting her eyes travel back to Tejo. He met her gaze with a calm depth that did not demand thanks, only acknowledged the fragile bridge forming between them. "The fever isn't gone," he murmured, his voice low and textured like wind through tall grass. "But it's weaker now. With warmth and rest, she may recover." Harper swallowed, her throat roughened, yet her reply flowed with sincerity. You saved us. Taeho did not respond immediately. He let her words settle, feeling their weight. He had been called many things by the town. Dangerous, unpredictable, a shadow that did not belong among them, but never savior. The idea felt foreign on his shoulders, yet Harper spoke it without hesitation, without fear. He turned to adjust the blankets around her, his fingers brushing her sleeve with a care that startled them both. Lena rose to help him, her small hands lifting folded cloths, eager to be useful. He watched her with a softness he rarely allowed himself, seeing in her the brave echo of the woman who once defended him against a dozen accusing voices. Harper's strength lived in her daughter, just as clearly as her tenderness. The three of them moved in a quiet rhythm, a fragile family bound not by blood but by circumstance, and something deeper growing in the spaces between their shared breaths. As the morning brightened, shadows lifted from the valley, revealing smoke trails rising from distant chimneys. Taeho's jaw tightened. The town was waking. Soon someone would notice Harper's absence. Soon someone would come looking. Harper read his expression before he spoke, and fear flickered across her features. They won't understand, will they? Taeho shook his head slowly. The town rarely understood anything that frightened them. And a woman found in the cabin of an Apache, a woman weakened, vulnerable, resting in the care of someone they already judged, would ignite enough speculation to fill the saloon for weeks. He could already hear the false assumptions sharpening like knives in the cold morning air. But Lena lifted her chin with the certainty of a child, who believed goodness should be obvious. You helped us. Why would anyone be upset? Taeho drew a deep breath, letting it out in a slow sigh. Because some people fear what they refuse to know. But you did not fear. That makes you braver than all of them. Before Lena could answer, a distant crunch of snow echoed through the valley. Taeho stiffened, instinct sharpening. He moved toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see the trail below. Two riders approached, their shapes cutting dark lines against the white landscape. One carried the posture of a man ready to accuse before understanding. The other moved with caution, someone who feared stirring the wrong embers. Harper's breath caught. Is it them? Taeho nodded quietly. The town is looking already. Stay resting. I won't let them harm either of you. He stepped outside before she could protest, the door closing behind him with a soft thud that sent a shiver through her spine. Outside, the cold gripped him again, but his expression remained calm, unreadable. The riders halted several paces away. The first, a man with narrowed eyes and a rigid jaw, barely acknowledged Taeho before glaring at the cabin. We heard Harper Collins is missing. Folks said they saw tracks leading up here. Thought we'd check before anything. Unfortunate happened. Taeho's silence pressed against them like a wall. Harper is ill, he finally said, his voice flat as stone. The girl came for help. I brought them inside to keep them alive. The man scoffed. That's quite the gesture, considering your history. The implication hung in the frozen air, heavy and cruel. Taeho's eyes did not waver. History is made by those who speak loudest, not those who speak honestly. The second rider shifted uncomfortably, clearly weighing the words. We just want to make sure she's safe. That's all. She is safe. With me. Inside, Harper heard his words and something inside her chest tightened painfully. Not from fear, but from the quiet certainty carried in his tone. The riders exchanged glances before finally turning back toward town, dissatisfaction trailing behind them like smoke. Taeho watched until they disappeared down the ridge, his shoulders only relaxing when the last hoofbeat faded. He returned to the cabin, snow melting down his forearms, the cold clinging to his breath. Harper looked at him with a mixture of relief and guilt. I didn't want trouble to come for you. Not because of me. Taeho shook his head. Trouble finds its own path. What matters is who we stand for when it arrives. His words hung between them, warm despite the winter air. The day grew brighter, melting frost from the windows, and Lena spent the afternoon drawing shapes in the condensation, humming softly to herself. Harper rested, her strength slowly returning, while Taeho tended to the lanterns around the cabin, lighting each one as dusk approached. Flames flickered in golden arcs, glowing against the snow like fallen stars scattered across the ridge. Lena watched from the doorway, all widening her eyes. You made the whole valley shine. Tahoe paused, lantern in hand. Your mother once lit a lantern for me. Tonight, I return the light. Harper heard him, her breath catching as she watched the warm glow reflecting across the snow, each lantern marking an unspoken promise. The cabin felt safer, fuller, as if the flames stitched invisible threads between their hearts. But as the final lantern flared to life, a distant figure appeared at the edge of the valley. One moving with purpose, one who had not been there earlier. Tahoe's breath quieted, his shoulders tightening as he studied the silhouette cutting through the fading light. Someone was coming. And this time, the valley would not remain silent. Dawn slid gently across the valley, its pale light spilling over the ridge like a prayer whispered into cold air, and Harper woke beneath the weight of furs that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Her fever had loosened its grip, leaving her exhausted but present, fully aware of the stillness in the room. Lena slept curled against her side, small breaths warm against Harper's arm. The cabin was peaceful, but not empty. There was a quiet strength woven into the air, a steadiness that had not existed before. When Harper lifted her gaze, she saw Tahoe crouched near the fire, adding wood with deliberate, unhurried motions, as though tending something more fragile than flame. He looked over, meeting her eyes with a softness that surprised her. "You're awake." His voice held warmth so natural it made her throat tighten. She tried to sit, but the effort shook her body. Tahoe was there instantly. Steadying her with a hand light enough to release the moment, she braced herself yet firm enough to show he would not let her fall. She murmured her thanks, but the words felt small in the vast gratitude swelling inside her. For a moment they simply sat in the pale morning hush, neither rushing the silence. Outside, snow glittered on every branch, shimmering where the rising sun touched it, and Lena stirred just enough to mumble in her sleep, her head shifting closer to Harper's ribs. Tahoe watched them with an expression Harper had trouble reading. Something between longing and respect, something that made her chest constrict in a way she wasn't ready to name. When Lena finally woke, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists, she climbed directly into Tahoe's lap, as though it were the most natural place in the world. He accepted her weight without hesitation, adjusting his posture so she could settle comfortably. Harper watched that small exchange with a tenderness she tried to hide. Her daughter had never trusted easily, yet here she was, leaning into a man the town called dangerous, finding comfort where others claimed none existed. As the morning warmed, Harper insisted she could stand. Tahoe allowed it but stayed close, each step she took observed with protective watchfulness, as though he feared she might fade if he looked away. She managed to reach the table before dizziness pulled at her again, and he steadied her elbow with a touch so gentle she felt something inside herself shift. Her pulse quickened, not from weakness but from awareness of how safe she felt in the presence of a man who had no reason to give her that safety. When she sat, Tahoe prepared broth with an attentiveness that bordered on reverence. He placed the bowl before her without ceremony, but Harper sensed the care behind the gesture, the way he watched for signs of strength returning to her face. She sipped slowly, letting warmth travel through her chest. Tahoe's gaze softened as color returned to her cheeks, and Harper felt heat rise where his eyes lingered. She looked away, fingers tightening around the spoon. The quiet between them grew layered, not empty, thick with unsaid truths neither was ready to touch. She finally broke the stillness. "I didn't mean to bring you trouble." Tahoe lifted his eyes, calm but unwavering. "Trouble doesn't concern me. You and your daughter do." His words entered her like warmth sinking into deep winter soil. No man had spoken to her like that, not even Caleb, who had once promised devotion, but delivered only abandonment and cold judgment. Harper looked at Tahoe, truly looked, seeing not just the strength in his shoulders or the quiet in his posture, but the steadiness he offered without expecting anything in return. She felt a tremor beneath her ribs, a reminder of how long she had walked through life without being gently seen. The day unfolded slowly. Lena followed Tahoe outside to learn how to read animal tracks in the snow, her laughter echoing across the ridge like soft bells. Harper leaned against the doorframe, wrapped in a blanket, watching the two figures move together. Lena with her eager steps, Tahoe with his patient stride. He pointed to faint patterns in the snow, and Lena nodded solemnly, as if he were revealing secrets older than the valley itself. Harper's chest warmed at the sight, a feeling too tender to name pressing at her heart. But the peace was fragile. Harper could sense it in the way Tejo's eyes drifted now and then toward the valley, scanning for movement, listening for hoofbeats. He was not afraid, yet he was prepared. Prepared for judgment, misunderstanding, confrontation. The town had never trusted him, had never cared to learn the truth behind their own assumptions, and Harper felt guilt twist inside her. They would blame him before listening. They always did. When Lena ran inside to fetch more wood, Harper stepped outside slowly, the cold brushing her cheeks with soft insistence. Tejo stood near the final lantern he had lit the night before, the flame inside flickering with the steady persistence of hope. Harper approached him, her blanket trailing lightly behind her. "I'm sorry the town came yesterday," she murmured. "I'm sorry they always come to you first when something goes wrong." Tejo didn't look at her immediately. He studied the lantern instead, the glow dancing across his expression. "People fear silence," he said quietly. "They fear strength that doesn't shout. They fear kindness they don't understand." Harper's eyes burned suddenly, unexpectedly. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "They judge you because they don't know you. But I know what it feels like to be misread. To be blamed for things you didn't break. To be left because someone refused to see the truth in you." Her breath caught, memories rising like ghosts in winter wind. Caleb's harsh words, his dismissal, his coldness disguised as practicality. And then the smaller, more painful memory, Harper believing him. Believing she was too weak, too fragile, too much. Tejo finally turned toward her, his gaze deep and unguarded. "Strength isn't loud, Harper. Strength is quiet enough to listen." He hesitated, searching her face. "You've carried more than anyone should alone." The words hit her with such gentleness she nearly broke. No one had ever acknowledged her pain without judgment. No one had ever spoken to her, as though she were worthy of understanding. Harper's voice wavered, her breath trembling with the truth she had held too tightly. "I tried to leave earlier, when you went outside. I thought if I walked back to town they'd stop troubling you. But the storm, and the fear." Tejo stepped forward, closing the distance between them with slow certainty. "You don't walk into storms alone anymore." Her breath froze, her heart stuttering in her chest. The lantern flickered between them, its light bending as if listening to the shift in the air. Something in Harper opened, a small door she had kept barred for years, a space that had long remained untouched because no one had earned the right to enter. But Tejo's words slipped inside before she could stop them. He lifted a hand, not touching her yet, but close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from his skin. Harper looked at him with a soft, trembling ache that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Tejo watched her as though waiting, not demanding, not expecting, simply allowing her to choose whether to step closer or retreat. The snow fell lightly around them, gentle as breath, settling in Tejo's hair, gathering along Harper's lashes. She parted her lips, something unspoken rising. Something dangerous, something tender. But before she could speak, before she could give shape to the tremor blooming inside her chest, a distant crack broke across the valley. A branch snapping. Or perhaps something far heavier. Tejo's head lifted, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. Someone was coming again. And this time, the quiet between them was no longer simply tender, it was a warning. Snow drifted in soft spirals as evening settled over the valley, turning the world into a hush of silver and quiet breath. Lanterns glowed along the ridge like a trail of fallen stars, each flame humming against the cold, each one bearing witness to the fragile hope that had taken root inside Tejo's cabin. Harper stood near the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her breath rising in pale ribbons as she watched Tejo scan the ridge with the wary patience of a man who had learned long ago that peace was something one guarded, not assumed. Lena clung to Harper's hand, sensing tension in the air though she didn't understand its shape. Then the figure emerged, slowly, deliberately, moving through the snow with the gait of someone returning not from worry but from ownership. Caleb Marsh. Harper's heart lurched painfully, an echo of old wounds tightening her chest. His coat was dusted with frost, his jaw set in the familiar way that once made her shrink inward. He stopped several paces away, his eyes flicking from Harper to the cabin behind her, then to Tejo, who stepped forward with a calm that did not waver. "So this is where you've been," Caleb said, his voice carrying the smug righteousness of a man who believed absence was something he could suddenly claim. "The town's been whispering. A woman vanishing in a storm. Her being found with an Apache." He spat the word as though it dirted his tongue. Harper felt shame prickle her skin, not because of where she was, but because of how easily his presence tried to shrink her again. Tahoe didn't move except to shift slightly, placing himself between Caleb and Harper with quiet intention. Harper felt the warmth of that gesture settle over her, like a shield she never knew she could lean on. Caleb's glare hardened. "You're coming home, Harper. Enough of this nonsense. I'll take the girl. You'll get better in your own house. This, whatever this is over." Harper's breath trembled. Old fear rose up, curling around her ribs like iron bands. She had lived too long beneath the weight of Caleb's expectations, too long believing her worth was something measured by how small she could make herself. But now Tahoe stood before her, steady as the mountain behind him, and Lena pressed closer, her small fingers tightening around Harper's hand in silent pleading. Caleb stepped forward, but Tahoe held out a single hand, not threatening, simply resolute. "She is not going anywhere without her consent." Caleb let out a cold laugh. "Since when does her consent matter? She's my wife. My responsibility. My burden." The words sliced through Harper, reopening old bruises that had never fully healed. She swayed, breath catching, but Tahoe's voice reached her like a warm hand closing around a trembling one. "She is not a burden." Caleb stared, stunned at the simplicity of the sentence. Tahoe didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every lantern in the valley seemed to lean toward him, their flames pulsing as though agreeing with the truth he carried. Harper felt something shift inside her, a breaking followed by an unfurling. She stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "I'm not going with you, Caleb. Not now. Not ever again." His face twisted, anger rising. "You're choosing him?" Harper shook her head, tears glimmering. "I'm choosing myself. For once. And my daughter. And peace." Caleb looked between them. Harper standing tall despite her weakness, Tahoe unmoving as a rooted tree, Lena peering out with defiance far bigger than her small frame. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that Harper was no longer the woman he could bend with sharp words and cold silence. With a final frustrated growl, he turned and stomped back into the storm, disappearing into darkness he carried within himself. The valley exhaled. Harper's knees nearly buckled, but Tahoe caught her gently, guiding her a few steps closer to the glow of the nearest lantern. His touch was steady, reverent, as though holding something precious he feared might slip away. Lena wrapped her arms around Harper's waist, grounding her with quiet love. The wind softened, brushing the three of them with a gentleness that felt like gratitude. Harper looked up at Tahoe, seeing not just strength but a tenderness that had shaped every choice he made since she collapsed in the snow. Her voice trembled with exhaustion and something deeper, something warm and terrifying. "You didn't have to stand up for me like that." Tahoe studied her, his gaze deep and searching. "I did." He lifted his eyes to the lanterns glowing across the ridge. "I lit every lantern for you. So you would see the truth you keep hiding from yourself." Harper's breath hitched. "The truth?" He stepped closer, his voice quiet as falling snow. "That I have loved you long before I had the courage to name it." The world seemed to still. The lantern flames flickered brighter, reflecting in the dark pools of his eyes. Harper felt the confession wrap around her like warmth spreading into places winter had long claimed. Her lips parted, but no words came, not because she lacked them, but because they trembled too deeply to form. Tahoe raised a hand, his fingertips brushing her cheek with a gentleness that both startled and soothed her. "You deserve a love that never asks you to shrink. You deserve a home where your breath is never too heavy for someone else to hold. You deserve to be seen." Harper closed her eyes, tears spilling silently as she leaned into his touch. For the first time in years, she felt herself unfolding rather than collapsing. When she finally spoke, it was barely more than a breath. "I didn't think anyone could love me this way." Tahoe's forehead touched hers, his breath mingling with hers beneath the lantern light. "I don't know how to love you any other way." Harper exhaled, a soft, trembling surrender. Then let me learn how to accept it. Lena's small voice broke the quiet, filled with sleepy wonder. Mama, are we staying? Harper smiled through her tears, pulling her daughter close. If he'll have us. Tejo's answer came without pause. You were home the moment you knocked. The wind carried their breath upward, mingling with the lantern light that shimmered like 1,000 quiet blessings. Snow drifted peacefully around them, settling in Tejo's hair, gathering along Harper's lashes, wrapping the three of them in the soft glow of a love that had waited patiently for winter to break. And as Christmas took its first breath across the valley, a new dawn rose inside all of them, warm, steady, unshakable, burning brighter than every lantern Tejo had ever lit.